I'm Alan Wartes, and this is Think Radio Presents Think People. My guest today is emerging podcaster Craig Coleman.
I couldn't reconcile the emotional pain that I was experiencing living in beautiful areas, living around successful people, air quotes, successful people, and I couldn't reconcile my internal emotional pain with that external perfect world.
Think People is underwritten by High Country News, telling the ongoing story of the modern American West. Through in-depth journalism and thought-provoking writing, the magazine has inspired people to act on behalf of the American West for 50 years. Learn more at hcn.org.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio. If you like Think People, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think Business, a weekly discussion with entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors on sustainable business into the 21st century. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Before we get to today's excellent conversation, I do want to remind you that you can go to thinkradiopresents.com and subscribe to our newsletter. If you do that, you'll get all kinds of cool stuff in your inbox every week, things that you couldn't get elsewhere, including easy links to all of the episodes and so forth. So I encourage you to do that. And while you're there at thinkradiopresents.com, follow the link to Patreon and become a Think Radio Presents supporter. We depend on listeners like you to help keep the lights on around here. My guest today is emerging podcaster Craig Coleman. Coleman currently offers his services as a freelance research project manager, drawing on decades of experience at Fortune 500 companies and in academia. But I think Craig will agree with me that that description only covers what he does to keep the bills paid. The heart of his story revolves around a decision he made several years ago to leave the corporate world behind and to hit the road, basically living off the grid. It's a passion that he shares in his podcast that he produces with co-host Brian Gallion. They call it Nomad Ramblings, Conversations from the Road. It's a raw and vulnerable look into the question that a lot of people ask themselves these days in modern society. Why does modern life so often seem not worth living? That's the question we want to talk today about. Craig, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I think you've done a better job describing what we're trying to do at Nomad Ramblings than I do.
Well, you can have that. Take that and use it, because that's the question that came to my mind as I listened to these conversations that you and Brian bring on a wide variety of topics. But really, there's this undercurrent that you touch in every episode of trying to get at, why are we so dissatisfied? What is it about the way that we have been conditioned to live that leaves us wanting more? Let's not dive straight into answering that question. Let's go first and hear your backstory. I mean, who are you? How did you get to this point where it became inevitable almost that you made this leap? Where'd you start out?
It's a great word, inevitable. Where did I start out? I started out growing up in very successful towns on the North Shore of Chicago, in the suburbs of New York City, where the executives of successful companies lived. And I grew up in a very affluent area, and I felt tension right from the get-go that I was living around million-dollar houses. I was living around men and families that brought in millions of dollars a year. And so the tension that I felt was, that's what I need to do, but I hate what I see.
Well, and because you grew up in an environment like that, it's just, that's what people do.
Exactly.
It's you don't even really think there might be a different way to live. This is just how people live. But not everyone growing up in that environment would say the second half of that sentence, I hate what I see. What was it about what you were seeing that you didn't like?
It's going to come across as arrogant, and I do have an arrogant side.
Well, that may be a trait that's a little bit underrated.
Yeah, I saw a lack of sincerity. I saw a lot of unhappiness in the families that I was around, and it didn't make sense. So you're growing up in a beautiful environment. I was on the water, close to the water, in both locations that I grew up. Everything was supposed to be right, and yet I experienced a lot of tension within my family, trying to conform or live up to it, and I also experienced it in other family settings, and it's really hard to explain that tension, but that's what I felt.
Well, the word that comes to my mind is dissonance.
That's a good word.
There's a dissonance between the mythology that says if you have all of these things, life is awesome, and the reality that no, life is just life. I mean, people are people, no matter what they have. At what point did you see more than just a tension and actually feel that you needed to act on it?
It's I'm fidgeting and shaking stuff up right now. At what point did I? So that I see two parts of that question. So at what point did I see it, and then at what point did I take action?
Yeah, let's start with part number one.
At what point? I think I did see it growing up. I saw it growing up in those areas, and it's hard to, because it's a linear gradient process, right? And so growing up, we I think on an internal side, on a body side, on a spirit side, we understand things that our minds don't understand.
Yeah, you're talking about intuition.
Yeah, that is the way. It's like you're better with words than I am. So I can I'll just get into it. I guess there's the hesitation on my part is coming from how raw, how real do I get? And
there's nothing holding us back.
All right. Well, no, it's on my side, okay. And that's the yeah.
All right.
And so that's
I'm just encouraging you.
Thank you.
I want this to be a safe place, and the only reason that it's valuable to people is that it's raw and vulnerable.
Right.
So,
okay. All right.
Please. So let me rephrase that question.
Sure.
Okay, because I think that was a little bit awkward. What exactly was it about the lifestyle that you were living and that you were observing in people around you that just seemed off to you? When you began to wake up and see that for what it was, what were the things that really stood out to you?
My father is a very educated, very intelligent man. He went to Jesuit seminary. He was going to become a Jesuit priest. He didn't go that way. He ended up going to Boston College undergraduate, and then he went to Dartmouth and got his MBA. And so what what I experienced growing up was his pursuit of that dream of getting, having a high-powered position and providing material things. And in his pursuit of that, there were things that were left that were not attended to. And so in moving into high school, I was experiencing, now I understand it, as depression. I was experiencing anxiety. I was actually engaged in self-mutilation. I was cutting up my arms because I couldn't reconcile the emotional pain that I was experiencing living in beautiful areas, living around successful people, air quotes, successful people.
Yeah.
And I couldn't reconcile my internal emotional pain with that external perfect world. And so it was at that moment when, in the middle of high school, where I sought help for that. I knew that things weren't right. And I don't fault my parents for it. All of us growing up, we're kind of acting on autopilot, and we're doing the best that we can. So I did seek help, and the help that I received, we can go into the specifics of it, but the help that I received was very damaging. And so it was at that moment where
that's an oxymoron.
Right?
I received damaging help.
So the incident was that I was not living at home at the time, and I was encouraged to go see the school nurse to talk through my problems. The school nurse encouraged me to see a doctor at a hospital, a psychiatrist. I followed through with that advice. I got a car. I went to Norwalk Hospital. I showed up for the appointment, and the doctor was not available. And so the nurse that was speaking with me said, "Well, why don't you tell me what's going on?" And I was like, "Well, this doctor comes highly recommended, and I am going to just come back when he's ready." Long story short, they attempted to lock me up. They called over security guard. They forced me to put on a gown. And all of this happened by me voluntarily seeking help. And so it's a complicated situation. So I'm experiencing this emotional pain before this event. I'm not supposed to be feeling this emotional pain because everything around me is puppy dogs and roses. And then I seek help, and I have this experience where they try to lock me up. I talk my way out of it, but that started my journey of not trusting anybody to help me out.
Well, yeah, I bet it was a long time before you walked into a setting like that again.
Yeah, and there's still, I still carry that distrust of the the quote unquote system, but it's not as simple as the light bulb turning on my mind and understanding what the problem was, and then taking action to correct that problem. So some of our earlier conversation, you kind of put it into these nice little boxed questions. When did I first know it? And then what did I do to fix it?
Not nearly that simple, is it?
It wasn't, yeah. And I the decades of work in considerable accomplishment that I've got in my background, that was a result of me seeking external solutions to my internal problems. So I was seeking achievement to get approval from a system that would, in my theory, in my mind, would correct my internal feelings of unrest, anxiety, depression.
Well, what strikes me about just about everything you've said so far is what a common story this is. And that's what makes this conversation interesting and valuable is I can imagine our listeners, there are large numbers of them that hear their own story and what you're talking about. First of all, feeling unsatisfied, but also feeling less than successful in their attempts to get help. But then there's this third element that you just mentioned. Okay, well, in that case, let's just throw ourselves into being the best citizen that we can be, the best at whatever field we choose. Let's follow that same path. It reminds me of the old song. Remember Harry Chapin's song, Cats in the Cradle?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? This is a common story. It's you could almost call it a theme in American society. And you took that path as well. You went down the road of, okay, well, I'm just gonna be the best I can possibly be, and that will be what saves me. But it didn't. Why not?
Well, I think it is a very common story, and I took a common pathway of seeking excellence, seeking glory to get that approval, all the while stuffing in the root problem, which was, I mean, in simple terms, untreated mental illness, if that's what you want to call it. So I did a lot of great things, but I was also drinking quite a bit. I was smoking a lot of marijuana. And so you had these two pathways. One pathway was Craig is going to school and getting good grades. He's turning corners to try to improve things. My only degree is in French from Lake Forest College. But I went back to school because I saw that was not good enough. So I went back to school.
Wait, not good enough. What does that mean? Good enough based on what standard?
Good enough based on the standards that I grew up in. Good enough on the standards of what my original goals were. My original goal when I went to Lake Forest College was to go pre-med. I was either to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I got a little caught up in the social side of things when I went to school, so I deviated from the pre-med, but I did go and I spent time over in Paris and got some things done. But
well, because this is also a common part of the story.
Sure,
is that what I really want to do isn't good enough.
Yes.
What I really feel passionate about won't make me rich. Won't
get the approval.
Either from family or society or both. And you said, okay, French isn't good enough.
So I'm going to go back to school, and I almost got a second bachelor's degree, but I did accumulate the courses to go to medical school, and I got a 3.92 GPA out of a 4.0, and I got the grades to go to medical school. I accumulated the courses to go to medical school, but then I broke down again. It's like I'm always breaking down at the side of the road. So I go and get my original degree and went and tried to do some things, but then I broke down at the road. I had this feeling of I'm not good enough. And then I went back to undergraduate school. I got the grades to get to where I thought I wanted to go, but then I broke down at the side of the road again. And then I shifted course and I went into pharmaceutical research and development. And I broke down at the side of the road after 4 years of doing that, doing very, very well. And then I moved to Hawaii. And so I could, that's the pattern in my story of.
Do you think there's some self-sabotage in all of that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And getting back to one of your earlier thoughts of this being a common story and a common theme. So you can easily tease that out, that there's some self-sabotage. And I can see that in myself. And I knew that there was self-sabotage going along my way, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it.
Well, because we sabotage ourselves in those situations. And I say we because I could tell you my own stories.
And I'm going to get you on my podcast to tell that story.
We'll trade places. I'll be in that chair. So I promise to be nice right now, so you have to do the same.
Of course.
No, I don't promise that at all. We sabotage ourselves because we can't bring ourselves to admit what our intuition would tell us. And that is, it's not just that I'm broken. It's that there's something broken in general about this picture.
Yes.
Right?
And when you say this picture, I interpret that as this paradigm that we all live in, that we go to school, we get good grades, we get a good job, and get married, have children, and everything is going to be okay. It's that's the in my experience, I've come to understand that it's that paradigm that is broken for me.
Right, and I think we ought to be clear that there's nothing wrong with having a good job. There's nothing wrong with raising a family and providing a nice home and all of those things.
No.
It's just if you expect that to be the source of everything in your internal life, that's the part that's disconnected.
Absolutely. And if you have, I hate this phrase. I don't like putting labels on myself. But if you have untreated mental illness, if you have unaddressed depression, if you have unaddressed anxiety, and you are seeking to solve those issues by following that pathway of, if I get a good enough job, it's going to fix it. If I get into a good enough relationship, it's going to fix it. If my
kids will be perfect, that'll make everything all right.
It's getting it. And to your point, no, I know many wonderful people that are successfully raising families and getting satisfaction out of corporate careers and jobs, and that's a beautiful thing. My story is that I was seeking those things to fix an underlying lack of self-acceptance.
Well, here's an interesting part of the story in my mind. Is we would typically say that, well, most people reach for a substance, right? Most people are drinking. You've already said that about yourself.
Yep.
Most people are medicating in some way or another. We don't usually think of clawing your way up the corporate ladder as a form of medication. But in your case, you're saying that's exactly what it was.
I was doing all the above. And that's an incredibly insightful observation that you just came. I actually have never thought of seeking those kinds of accomplishments as a form of medication. I have recognized, and I no longer drink. I no longer do any drugs or anything of that nature because I saw that as a medication, but I never put two and two together like you just did, and clearly identified seeking accomplishment as a substance abuse of a certain kind.
I mean, because on that day when you get the promotion or you land the contract or whatever, man, that's a powerful drug. The high is huge. But the next day, you're still stuck with your interior self. And it really can be just as dissatisfying if unsatisfying if you're not also addressing those internal things. So the question to you is, when did you finally realize, wait, I'm barking up the wrong tree here? And how? How did that realization hit you?
Yeah, and those aren't pinpoints on the timeline, but I can point to a few specific events. Mm-hmm. So one event was when I was in Hawaii. I had gone to graduate school for oceanography, and that choice, essentially, I went down there to get into cancer research, and I did some of that. But I saw oceanography, and I was like, that's pretty darn cool. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go into oceanography, and other people are going to think I'm cool that I'm doing that. But when I got into the program, it started to break down again, and I shifted out of graduate school because I recognized that I am seeking to meet other people's expectations by choosing to go to oceanography graduate school. I'm not going to oceanography graduate school because I like oceanography. It's cool. But internally, I can say that that's not a vocational call to me. I need a vocational call. I need something that feels true to me. Oceanography is not that. So I shifted away from that, and I went into energy research for an economics research group. Energy is something I'm actually passionate about. But what ended up happening in this situation, I'm giving you another time point, is I essentially wrote my own job description for the position that I was going to be offered. And I called out my own salary. And so that's everybody's dream, right? To write their own job description and to come up with their own salary. It was all accepted. And I thought, this is...
Now what?
Yeah, I don't even feel good about this. I don't even feel good about this.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I self-sabotaged in a really destructive way. I did continue to do numerous good things that other people would look at as accomplishments, but internally I was spiraling down and down. I was drinking more and more. I was smoking more and more pot, and then that's when I moved into my truck, and I said, I'm either going all the way down, or something's going to change. And to make a long story short, I spent a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, crisscrossing the country in my truck, looking for opportunities to bolster things inside of me, but also knowing that they weren't working anymore. And so it was, I think that there's a common phrase or understanding in those with drinking problems, that the booze doesn't work anymore. You recognize you're stone sober after drinking, more than a fifth of vodka. It doesn't work anymore. And I was experiencing that with both substance abuse, but I was also experiencing that with accomplishment. And I ended up in North Dakota on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation during that period of, I think it was 2 years ago, where they were blasting water cannons at the water protectors. I was up there to, once again, I'm an energy expert. I am going to assert myself, and I'm going to go save the world. I'm going to show everybody how great I am by going as an objective observer to this energy problem. And
not really an energy problem at all, but
no, but it was that was part of the discussion,
sure,
right?
Sure.
And I thought I could bring objective views. Once again, I'm trying to solve my internal unrest. And you've got people, I was surrounded by people that were passionate about stopping the pipeline from going in. And I was hollow inside. I was dead inside. I was drinking a lot. And on Thanksgiving morning, 2016, I was ready to end it. I was contemplating on a very detailed level, how do I kill myself in a way that people won't know that I killed myself, that they'll think it's an accident. So they talk about in mental health that the ideation. So it's everybody, not everybody, many people experience, I don't want to live anymore. But it's not a real problem until you start
making a plan.
Make a plan. And I was going through a very detailed plan on how to do it.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because you've said you went up there because you had this grandiose idea that you had something critical to offer. Mm-hmm. And in the same breath, you're saying that you were considering killing yourself. Those two things were living side by side.
Oh, yeah. And the idea that I had something to offer, lost. I saw that I had nothing to offer. And I remember it was the day, no, it was 2 days after the water cannon event. And I was sitting outside the casino, because everybody would go to the casino and plug in with their laptops and whatnot. And I was sitting outside the casino in my car drinking coffee, and I was bawling. And I was ready to end it all at that point. And that, I think, if I were to answer, going back to your original question, that's the moment that the dramatic shift truly happened. And it wasn't as though I had the idea of like, okay, Craig, like settle down, let's reorient ourselves and get back on the right track. There was nothing of that. It was a complete. They talk about it again in substance abuse areas, that surrender, that hitting bottom, and that I completely surrender. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I am ready to end it all. I am ready. I am absolutely ready.
But why didn't you?
My sister, who I've been very close with, I have 3 sisters, and this is my oldest sister. She was going through a transition. She's got 2 kids. Surgeons are crazy busy. So that in and of itself was challenging for her. But then she needed to do this move. And I said, well, if I'm going to kill myself, I might as well go help her before I do that. And so I drove from North Dakota to Alexandria, Virginia.
Still with the intention of committing suicide at some point?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But I was like, I'll just get her through this, and then I'll go off the deep end somewhere. But there was just a single. There was just the idea that I might as well go help someone else. If I can't continue on, I might as well just go help someone with this last hurdle and then get it done. So that was Thanksgiving 2016. And I got to her place. The move was going to happen in December 20th timeframe. So I got to her place around December 1st. And I spent probably a week and a half drinking in her basement. And then December 11th is my sobriety date. That was the day where I was like, well, if I'm going to help her, I might as well get sober. Like, and it wasn't even like I need to help myself, but it was just like it's going to make it go easier because when you were drinking, when one is drinking the amount that I was drinking, you're not going to help anybody. And so I was like, I just at least need to stop drinking to help her, be able to help her out.
It almost sounds like there was some part inside you that was tricking you.
I'm absolutely. I think that, again, when one looks at people who get sober and all the 12-step programs that are out there, and I've been reading, self-help books since I was 12 years old. I mean, I at 12 years old, I read Think and Grow Rich, by Napoleon Hill, and so I've been well exposed to all of this.
You know the drill.
I know the drill. Yeah. So that idea of a higher power, something greater than myself, has always resonated within me. But I've fought it, and just like you identified, I can look at that point in my lifetime where something else had to come in and give me guidance.
And apparently it did, because here you sit.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you have all the answers. I'm not saying that.
No,
I'm just saying you didn't follow through. But let's go back and pick up an important detail, okay? You're sitting outside of a casino in your car. You're a middle-aged man. There is an epidemic in this country among middle-aged men who do follow through. They do commit suicide. They do end it all. You're speaking for and to a large and hurting segment of the population. And so it's important, it's critical to understand why you didn't pull a trigger or take the pills or whatever it was. How are you still sitting here when others aren't?
So again, going back to that moment, there wasn't there was no rational thought going on at that time. But answering your question, why am I still sitting here? I believe that it comes from a willingness to start to talk to people about the hurt, the wounds. So for the better part of my life, and due greatly to that event that happened at the hospital back when I was 16, I did not trust that I could address the problem by talking to others. And I think that
it wasn't safe to do so.
No, and I think that men are raised, at least in this culture, where we don't talk about our problems to fix them.
Certainly not the internal ones.
We get out there and get it done. We suck it up and we go get it done. Mm-hmm. Suck it up, cupcake. Mm-hmm. Like, go get it done. Like, stop complaining, go get it done. So answering your question in speaking to those that are out there, I believe that I'm sitting here because of my final surrender and willingness to speak to others, and because of the receptivity of others to listen to me. And it didn't come through it didn't come on professional lines. I'm talking about just developing relationships. And have you've likely, I'm sure you've heard it. Are you familiar with Brené Brown?
No.
So Brené Brown is I don't even know what she's a researcher, but she produced a viral TED Talk a few years ago titled The Power of Vulnerability. So, as the title suggests, her thesis and her research supports that when one is vulnerable, when one is willing to be vulnerable, healing takes place on the part of the person who's being vulnerable, but healing also occurs on the other side of the table from one who is listening. And so there's power exchanged, and it's not located in either individual. There's actually, I forget the term, but the sum of the parts is greater than the in the individual. So that is why I'm sitting here today, because I started to become willing to be vulnerable to others, and others listened to me, and momentum started. Healing began, and it's not a linear one-off process.
Whatever is.
And I still resist it at times, but that's what I experienced, and that's what I believe today that I have to offer others is, number one, I know what the pain feels like. I know from as I can remember when I was 11 years old, lying on my bathroom floor naked with the bathtub running and just crying and what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? I can remember cutting up my arms. I can remember putting cigarettes out on my hands. And then I can remember the magic elixir of booze, all of my feelings, all of that hurt going away.
Momentarily, at least.
And riding that train for a while, riding that train along the same way and at the same time riding the train of everybody, I am going to prove to everybody that I am amazing. I am going to prove to everybody is wrong about what they think about me. I am going to prove them all wrong, and I am going to achieve glory. So both of those trains are going along. I know what that feels like to go and succeed. I know what it feels like to stand in front of a room of executives and have their eyes of admiration and this guy's got it, but still feeling dead inside. And then going and keeping and going and going and going. I know what it feels like to sit in my car hoping to find the willingness and the courage to end it all. Yeah. And so I'm speaking to the individual out there that can understand what I'm saying, and my message is that there is a way out, and it is by being willing to be vulnerable,
Stop running.
To stop running, to sit down, and I think that there is something about I naturally will open up to women, and anybody can get their little psychology hat on and talk about why that is. But my experience is that there is something about sitting across from another man and revealing oneself, revealing one's pain, and having that other man understand and reciprocate.
So there's a dual message here then. If you're that guy who knows what it feels like to sit in the car and think the thoughts that you thought, find someone to talk to. But the other side of that message is, if you're a man in this culture, and maybe you haven't been to that point, but you speak this language, you've heard these messages your entire life, be willing to listen without judging the story that you're hearing. That there's two sides of that story. You can be willing to be vulnerable, but if nobody's going to listen to you, then the circuit doesn't close.
Yeah, you are. I'm trying to figure out. There's something missing from that. So yes, you're right in identifying those two roles. If I re-summarize that, so be willing to talk and be willing to listen. I think the third thing, and this is me, my ego talking, I want to grease the wheels between those two disconnected points. So I've experienced what it's like to resist being willing to talk. And I've also experienced what it's like being resisting to listen. And so my role is to do both.
Well, you're playing that role right now by sharing your story and encouraging people to do the same. And your podcast is about a lot of things. It's about your experiences living off the grid and, shoveling snow in a Colorado winter and so forth and so on. But mostly it's about this idea of vulnerability, right?
It is for me. It's interesting. So Brian Gallion is my partner in the podcast, and I certainly don't want to. I don't want to define it in a way that he's not willing to step on. He's been willing to walk this pathway with me. I think he's got some different ideas, but that is that's my vocation. I think is really what it comes down to, and that's what I'm trying to deliver with the podcast and some of the other stuff. And just to add some context, and maybe you're going to ask me some questions on it, but so I do a lot of truck camping stuff, shoveling snow. Like if you've looked at my website and some of that stuff, some of it's silly and
it's the practicalities of living off the grid.
Yeah, but there is some underlying importance on that stuff for me, because for me, part of that is looking back to that successful environment, air quotes, successful environment that I grew up with, and saying, no, like that's not successful to me. What I'm looking for something that is successful, and I'm feeling my way around in the dark by this truck camping stuff and this all these other little activities. I'm looking with fresh eyes to what it is that I want to do, not meeting the expectations. And I don't want to fault anybody way back there. I've got good friends and whatnot. They didn't do that to me. They didn't push those things. That was me in how I interpreted things. But anyway, that's...
Well, I think that's what makes your podcast such an interesting journey to follow, because you don't come on and say you have the answers. You're saying, look, I'm stumbling around in the dark here trying to find what works and what doesn't. And that so describes the pathway that so many people are walking today. And so thank you for that. Nomad Ramblings, you can find it on iTunes. I encourage you to listen. Craig, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Alan.
Excellent conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.